I started noticing the photographs by accident. Old images from the 1890s, construction sites across America, Europe, Asia, buildings rising from nothing. Not small buildings, massive ones, courthouses, libraries, hospitals, opera houses with domed ceilings that stretched 5 stories high, all erected within months, sometimes weeks, according to the captions beneath them. And I kept asking myself the same question. How? Not why they built them, not who paid for them, but how, physically, mechanically, practically, how did they do this? Because the official story doesn't add up. We're told these structures were built with horse-drawn carts, hand tools, steam-powered cranes that could barely lift their own weight. We're told small crews of workers, many of them unskilled labourers, constructed architectural marvels that rival anything we build today. We're told this was normal. But when you look at the evidence, really look, the timeline collapses. The technology doesn't match, the speed defies explanation, and the scale becomes impossible. Take the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. The official narrative says it took 2 years to build, 2 years to construct over 200 buildings covering 600 acres. Monumental structures with classical facades, soaring colonnades, intricate plasterwork, all gleaming white. The photos show buildings that look ancient, permanent, as if they'd stood for centuries. They were supposedly temporary. Ask yourself, how do you build 200 buildings in 2 years using only manual labour and primitive machinery? How do you achieve such uniformity, such precision, such architectural sophistication in that time frame? How do you coordinate thousands of workers without modern communication systems? How do you transport materials without trucks, without railways connecting every site, without the industrial capacity we take for granted today? The deeper I went, the more examples I found. San Francisco's Civic Center, completed in record time after the 1906 earthquake. Massive neoclassical structures rising from rubble. Paris rebuilt entire arrondissements in the mid-1800s with identical Haussmann-style buildings, thousands of them, all constructed within a decade. St. Petersburg, Russia, entire palatial complexes, Berlin's Museum Island, Vienna's Ringstrasse, all built with shocking speed, all exhibiting the same architectural language, the same mathematical precision, the same impossible scale. And here's the strangest part. They all look the same. Not similar. The same proportions, the same symmetry, the same classical vocabulary, repeated across continents. As if builders in Chicago were copying blueprints from Vienna. As if architects in Buenos Aires were following the same instruction manual as those in Melbourne. The coordination shouldn't be possible. Not with the communication technology of the era. Not with the transportation systems, not with horse and buggy. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. If you're starting to question what you've been taught about architectural history, you're not alone. This investigation goes deeper than anyone expected. Let me show you what I mean. Look at photographs from the 1880s and 1890s. Construction sites in New York, London, Budapest. You see the same thing. Wooden scaffolding, horse-drawn carts, men in bowler hats standing beside foundations that descend 30, 40, 50 feet into the earth. Foundations requiring excavation of thousands of tons of soil. Foundations demanding precision engineering to prevent collapse. How? How do you excavate that much earth with shovels and wheelbarrows? How do you shore up walls that deep without modern support systems? How do you ensure stability without ground-penetrating radar, without soil analysis, without the geological surveys we consider essential today? The official explanation collapses here. They tell us it was skilled labour. They tell us craftsmanship. They tell us people worked harder back then, that progress was slower but steady. But that doesn't explain the evidence. It doesn't explain why buildings constructed in months still stand today, while modern structures require years of planning, environmental studies, safety regulations, computer modelling. It doesn't explain the stonework. I examined photographs of Capitol buildings, courthouses, train stations from the 1890s, massive granite blocks fitted together with hairline precision, no mortar gaps, no visible seams, stones weighing tons positioned so exactly that you couldn't slide a knife blade between them. This is the kind of precision we struggle to achieve even now, with laser-guided equipment and computer-controlled machinery. They supposedly did it with chisels and manual hoists. Look at the interiors, vaulted ceilings with mathematical perfection, acoustic properties engineered to distribute sound evenly across amphitheatres, seating thousands, ventilation systems that maintained air circulation without electricity, structural load-bearing calculations that somehow anticipated stress patterns we didn't formally understand until the 20th century. This raises a simple but critical question. What if they didn't invent this technology? What if they inherited it? If you're finding this investigation compelling, consider subscribing. These mysteries don't fit neatly into official history, and uncovering them requires looking where conventional narratives refuse to go. The construction timelines don't just strain credibility, they shatter it. Consider the Paris Opera House. Official records claim it took 15 years to build. 15 years of continuous construction, which sounds reasonable until you examine what that entails. A structure covering 3 acres, foundations descending to the water table. Over 2,000 rooms, intricate plasterwork covering every surface, a chandelier weighing 6 tons suspended from a painted ceiling that required scaffolding just to access, marble staircases, hidden passages, underground lakes. 15 years, with hand tools, with horse-drawn carts bringing marble from quarries hundreds of miles away, with workers using ropes and pulleys to position stones weighing thousands of pounds with millimetre precision. Does that timeline make sense to you? Now multiply that across an entire city, across multiple cities, across continents. The pattern repeats. Building after building, city after city, all constructed in impossibly short periods, all exhibiting the same level of sophistication, all appearing in the historical record as if they'd always been there, as if the construction process was merely a formality, a restoration of something that already existed beneath the surface. I started looking at construction photographs more carefully. What struck me wasn't what they showed, it was what they didn't show. No massive labour camps housing thousands of workers. No industrial yards processing raw materials at scale. No evidence of the logistical infrastructure required to support projects of this magnitude. Just small crews standing beside structures that towered above them, structures that looked nearly complete despite supposedly being in early construction phases, as if they were uncovering rather than building. Here's where the official narrative truly breaks down. Imagine coordinating the construction of identical buildings across the world in the 1890s. No telephones connecting most sites, no standardized measurement systems. America used different units than Europe, which used different units than Asia. No international shipping networks capable of transporting blueprints, materials, expertise at scale. No architectural schools teaching a unified curriculum. Yet somehow, buildings in Melbourne matched buildings in Montreal. Courthouses in Texas resembled courthouses in Budapest, down to the column spacing, the window proportions, the decorative elements. The same neoclassical language, the same mathematical ratios, the same construction techniques. The probability of this happening by chance approaches 0. Either there was a level of global coordination we've never been told about, or these structures came from something earlier, something that predated national boundaries, something that established architectural standards we've since attributed to the wrong civilization. And that's where the alternative explanation becomes impossible to ignore. The evidence suggests a previous system, an inherited infrastructure, a network of building techniques, material sciences, engineering principles that weren't invented in the 1800s, but rediscovered, repurposed, rebuilt according to instructions that may not have been fully understood. Think about medieval cathedrals. We're told illiterate stonemasons constructed Notre Dame, Chartres, Cologne Cathedral, structures exhibiting advanced geometry, acoustic engineering, structural engineering far beyond what we credit medieval societies with understanding. The official story says they built these through trial and error over centuries. But what if they were following older blueprints? What if they were restoring what had been damaged or forgotten? What if the Dark Ages weren't primitive, but rather a period of reconstruction, of learning to rebuild what had been lost? Start with the photographs themselves. Aerial views from the 1860s and 1870s showing cities that appear ancient. Not new, not under construction, ancient, fully developed urban grids with mature trees lining streets, buildings that look weathered, settled as if they'd stood for generations. Yet the official chronology claims these cities were wilderness just decades earlier. San Francisco in 1865, a fully formed metropolis, blocks of multi-story buildings, elaborate commercial districts, infrastructure suggesting centuries of development. This was supposedly 40 years after the first European settlers arrived. 40 years to go from tents to metropolitan complexity. The deeper I looked, the more I found structures half buried in earth, not from flooding, not from catastrophic events recorded in history, just buried. Buildings with first floors that became basements, windows that became cellar openings, doors that led nowhere because several feet of soil now covered the original ground level. Not water damage, not slow erosion, not decades of gradual build-up, but meters of mud, of earth, of sediment that appeared suddenly, that covered entire cities partially, that forced populations to simply build up, to add new floors, to pretend the buried levels never existed. Why? Why would cities across the world show this same pattern? Why would populations accept it without extensive documentation, without investigation, without explanation? Why are there so few records of this burial event despite it requiring massive adaptation, rebuilding, re-engineering of urban infrastructure? The silence was deafening. I found architectural surveys from the early 1900s noting basement levels and subterranean structures beneath major cities. Surveys mentioning old foundations, old passages, old systems that predated known construction dates. Surveys that raised questions about chronology but never pursued them, as if asking too deeply was discouraged. Here's what should disturb you most. For construction projects of this magnitude, projects that supposedly employed thousands, that required vast material resources, that represented enormous capital investment, the documentation is suspiciously sparse. Where are the detailed construction logs? Where are the engineering journals describing new techniques developed to achieve such scale? Where are the worker testimonies, the accident reports, the material invoices, the transportation records, the equipment inventories that should exist for projects spanning years? They don't exist, not comprehensively, not in the way you'd expect. What exists are newspaper mentions, brief captions beneath photographs, official dedicatory plaques noting completion dates but not construction details, architectural drawings showing final designs but not the engineering solutions required to realize them. It's as if the process itself was deliberately left undocumented, or as if the process was so routine, so normal, so widely understood that documentation seemed unnecessary. The way you might not document how to build a house today because everyone already knows. The way technical knowledge becomes common sense. But if that knowledge was common sense in the 1890s, where did it go? Why can't we replicate these structures today without modern technology? Why do contemporary attempts to build in this style require years of planning, computer modelling, specialised machinery, when supposedly our ancestors achieved the same results with hammers and horses? The evidence suggests something much larger. I kept finding references to hydraulic systems, pneumatic mechanisms, pressure-based technologies integrated into building foundations, systems that utilize water movement, air compression, mechanical advantage in ways we no longer practice, underground reservoirs beneath opera houses, channels connecting buildings to water sources, sealed chambers with no clear modern purpose, air shafts descending far deeper than ventilation requires, networks of passages suggesting infrastructure beyond mere utility. These weren't add-ons, they were integral, built into the foundations, essential to the original design. And then, after about 1910, the references stop. Engineering journals that routinely discussed atmospheric pressure applications fall silent. Architectural plans no longer include these systems. Construction techniques shift away from these integrated networks towards simpler, less sophisticated approaches. As if someone closed the book and pretended those chapters never existed. Why would we abandon more advanced technology for something demonstrably inferior? Unless it wasn't our technology to begin with. Unless we'd been maintaining something we didn't fully understand. And when that understanding finally failed, when the last people who knew how to operate these systems died or disappeared, we simplified. We replaced complex hydraulic networks with basic plumbing. We substituted integrated pressure systems with crude electrical alternatives. We called it progress. Look at photographs from 1890 versus 1920. 30 years, a single generation. In 1890, cities are filled with ornate classical buildings, architectural sophistication everywhere, uniform aesthetic, coordinated design, structures that convey permanent stability, knowledge. By 1920, everything changes. Suddenly, we're building simpler structures. Architectural standards decline. Classical proportions disappear. The ornate gives way to the utilitarian, as if an entire civilization forgot how to build beautifully. This isn't gradual aesthetic evolution. This is rupture, and it coincides with a historical period of massive upheaval. World wars, social revolutions, economic collapse. A period when records could be lost, rewritten, or deliberately obscured. A period when asking questions about the past became politically dangerous. A period when a new narrative could be established. Ask yourself, what happened between 1890 and 1920? Why did architectural capabilities seem to decrease? Why did we start building differently, thinking differently, teaching differently? Why does the historical record show such discontinuity? And why does no one talk about it? I can't tell you definitively what happened. I can't name the civilization that built these structures or explain precisely how they did it. I can't prove the existence of advanced technology that's since been lost. But I can show you the patterns. I can show you buildings across continents exhibiting impossible construction speeds. I can show you architectural sophistication that shouldn't exist with horse and buggy technology. I can show you coordination that defies the communication systems supposedly available. I can show you buried structures, missing records, abandoned techniques, and a historical narrative that doesn't explain what physically remains. I can show you the evidence of inheritance rather than invention. When you stand before one of these buildings, a courthouse, a library, a train station from the 1890s, really look at it. Notice the precision, notice the scale, notice how the stones fit together seamlessly. Notice the proportions that please the eye automatically. Notice the details that required understanding of geometry, acoustics, load distribution, material science. Then ask yourself, could this have been built with primitive tools in a matter of months? Or was it already there, waiting to be restored, repurposed, claimed by a new population that learned to maintain what they found, but not to build anew? The official history offers clean answers, clear timelines, comfortable narratives about progress, about human achievement, about civilization advancing through innovation and hard work. But the structures themselves tell a different story. They whisper of knowledge we've lost, of capabilities we've forgotten, of a system so advanced, so integrated, so far beyond what we credit the 19th century, with possessing that acknowledging it would require rewriting everything we think we know about our past. And maybe that's why the silence persists.